So, right, okay, so it takes a few minutes to come through. Yeah, we are now live. So, I'm going to say, welcome everybody. Today's special guest is somebody that I came across in, I think, 2015, I believe, playing a very, very rare memory moog. This is an instrument that I'd heard and seen on television with people like Thomas Rocard playing, but never actually seen one in the flesh. So I was immediately interested in this, and as a result, the piece that Matthew was playing was very, very interesting. I was immediately struck by these lovely, warm, evolving pads with some gorgeous jazz soloing in there, and lovely, lovely little progressions and little incidentals and all sorts of things, which really made ambient music in this case very, very interesting and very, very engaging. I subsequently found out Matthew was indeed also a highly regarded jazz pianist who won the 2001 Perrier Prize and had worked with none other than Keith Tippett. He pursues both acoustic and electronic approaches and defines his own style. Often very humorous, his work can be both very serious and very, very witty, often at the same time. Please welcome Matthew Bourne.
Thank you. Thanks for the intro. It's a pleasure to be on this edition of your Synth Natter.
Thank you. I've now got, from what I forgot, is we do in fact have an intro. So, Matthew, thanks for coming on, and tell me about the memory moog. How did you actually acquire this instrument in the first place?
Yeah, I was always attracted to it because my first synth I bought was a Moog Prodigy, and I bought that from, oh man, this is a long story about that as well, but I bought it from a place in Alsager called Music Control, and it was a great little synth to get started on, but I would go back there a couple of times here and there, and I was on a waiting list for a mini moog, which when eventually they phoned to offer me at the price of 1,500 quid, fully restored, I didn't actually have the money, so I passed up on it. But I remember seeing a memory moog there, and it was in okay working condition. We had a chat about the memory moog, and I just thought, wow, that's kind of the ultimate thing. And he was telling me that Toby Smith from Jamiroquai loved that synth, and they used to service his equipment a lot. So the idea of it was floating around in the back of my head. And then one day I was just on eBay looking around, and I put in memory moog, and there was one that came up for £1,750.
Ooh.
In Huddersfield, which obviously is very close to Leeds.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's a lot. I don't have that kind of money. I could afford it, but I can't justify the expense. So I watched it end, and it ended, and no one bid on it. So I emailed him straight away and said, I can't believe nobody bid on it. He was the only owner. He'd owned it since new. And I said, would you take 1,500 quid for it? And he said, I've just relisted it. And so I waited for another 3 days, hoping that nobody would bid. And then in the end, in the last 10 seconds, I put a bid of 2,500 on it. And nobody else bid, so I got it for the price that he wanted. I got it for 1,750. I went round to his house. He loved this synth. He used to be in Jerry and the Pacemakers, and he played with all sorts of bands, and he had all sorts of gear. But this was his pride and joy, and he spent an hour taking me through it. He really, really knew the thing inside out. And when I came to put it in the back of the car, he got very emotional and he went a bit quiet. And I said, "Hey, look, this is going to the right place. I just rest assured." And he said, "Yeah, that's half of my life in there." So I bought that in 1982 from a place in Bingley, which is 2 miles away from where I live now. Wow. And so I've always kept in touch with him. And then years later, it worked fine for 18 months. And then it started to go wrong because I'd heard all the stories about how it would break down on a regular basis. And I thought, well, there's nothing wrong with mine. Mine's fine. Mine's amazing. And then once on a gig, I went to tune it and it just said 5 tuned. I went, oh no, and nothing was in tune. I'd mono everything, and then it wasn't right. And I thought, okay, I turned it on and turned it off and turned it on again. Then it was worse. Then it said 3 tuned. I'm like, no, and it just failed. I then had it fixed by a really good friend of mine, Trevor Leroy, but even after he'd done it, it developed another fault, and they're just notorious. So I took the plunge, and I contacted Rudy Linhard in Germany, who obviously, modifies them, so that brings them up to today's standards of reliability and in terms of components and things. So we had a very long email exchange. I sold a car. I didn't have a car for a while just to afford to be able to pay him to do it. So I sent it to him, and he's very busy, and he's obviously got a backlog of machines, instruments that he's working on. When he finally looked at it, about 3 months after I sent it to him or something, he emailed me, and in typical fashion, he just said, "I've finally had a look at your Moog. I'm afraid to say that it's been messed around by too many well-meaning but bad techs in the past. This machine is a nightmare. You'd be better off taking it to bits, selling all the Curtis chips, and then using that money to buy another one, and then send me that one. Cheers, Rudy."
Oh no!
Yeah, and then I didn't know what to do, so I pleaded with him, and then he explained that he worked on all kinds of instruments, but it would cost me more money. And I said, "Well, what are the kinds of things you've done in the past?" And he said, "Well, the worst one I did was one that had been sent to him from Florida, where it had been in a studio, and it had been underwater for 2 weeks because of the flooding in Florida in 2009.
God.
And I said, right, if you can fix a memory Moog that's been submerged in water for 2 weeks, you can fix mine, okay?"
Yeah.
And he went, "Okay, but it's going to cost you more money." I went, just get on with it.
Oh no! You have to go pleading to the bank manager. "Can I have a loan, please?"
But you know what? And I got it back, and then I didn't really touch it for a while. I was scared of it in a way. And then as time went on, I just started dabbling around in it on gigs, and I didn't really know it. I wasn't sure what I was doing. Yeah. And then I was doing such a lot of collaborative work with other people, mainly abroad in France, and so my head wasn't really in the right gear. And I'd be working with the Leaf label, and they were saying, "Where's your next album? It's been ages. What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to do a synth record." Yeah. And I didn't. And then one summer, I just sat down here in my house on the floor with the memory Moog and just started recording like a diary almost. I was making this kind of a diary approach to the tracks, because I thought, well, if I find a patch I like, I'll save it and then just save whatever I was doing so that I can come back. And the problem is that because I do everything there and then, and everything's quite spontaneous, the rough tracks, as what I felt were rough diary entries in a sense, actually became the takes that are on the record, because I would come and revisit it and think, right, let's do this properly, but it never had the same vibe. So I had to trick myself into making the record, because I found if I tried to perfect things over and over again, it just it disappeared. It went out of sight, and I had to give up. So a lot of the pieces I just played, and I thought, well, who's ever done an album on one instrument and only explore that? I mean, particularly a Moog, something like that. I thought, I don't know if anybody had done a solo memory Moog record and just sat and played the thing. So I thought, well, that's the USP. And I've been talking to Nils Fram through this period. We were in touch talking about recording together and things. So I was sending him some of these early pieces, and he said one of the pieces I named after him. And it was, I named it after him because I sent it to him, and he responded and said, yeah, this sounds great. Have you thought about adding any of the instruments, overdubs and things, because of the character of the memory Moog is so singular, and yet other things could bring in, different textures and different things. And then I thought, no, because actually you've just given me that's the USP of the record. It's only going to be this machine, and why not? So actually his suggestion to add more made me go in the exact opposite direction, and I just added less, and I let the Moog do the talking.
There is an interesting thing going back to what you were saying about jotting down ideas in a diary and then trying to perfect them, and as you do that, the original vibe gets further and further away. I've certainly noticed that myself in my playing at times, and you keep playing things over and over and over. You think you're distilling the idea down, but very often in that distillation process you often lose the bits that make it interesting, and very often it's the slight mistakes, it's the slight off kilter, off meter notes, etc., that really kind of make it interesting. And I'm sure there's a fair few people out there in the greater world have actually found that themselves as well.
It's funny because coming from a piano playing background, I guess I sit and I play an instrument. What I've never done is, apart from the exception of the cover of Susudio, I've never really done the whole MIDI thing. I don't really do MIDI programming. I only record what I can physically play. Or that's at least what I've chosen to do. So I kind of limited myself to that. And when there are a couple of them that have that are multi-tracked, but in the same within the same time frame, I would try and complete what I had to do within the same period. So that period could be 3 hours, or I could start it in the afternoon and leave it and come back to it in the morning. But if I didn't complete the piece within a 24-hour period, which for me is long, I would scrap it. It would just disappear. So what I call the bigger pieces that on the record, like Denisial was done in 2 halves of 2 different days, and then there's one called Horn and Vellum, which I just did in one afternoon, and I played all the parts in, and I just had to do it whilst I felt the surge of adrenaline. Otherwise, I knew it would be gone forever.
It's like always do. Speaking of Susudio, your cover of Susudio, you used a very interesting stylophone. And of course, the first symphonetta, I was talking to Leo Kaldos about stylophones. This one looks very, very different. Can you tell me anything about it?
Oh, well, yeah, the track I used that on is called Jacqueline, and that was meant to be a deliberate duo between the most amazing piece of equipment that I have and the worst piece of equipment that I have. So it's like a lament for like a dying stylophone. I found it at a car boot sale with its original box, and I got it home and I put it on eBay for $2,000, and I talked this thing up just for a joke, just to see what would happen. And I had a guy who offered me 20 quid for it. He said, look, you do know these are only worth, I paid a $5. He said, you do know these are only worth like 10 quid, but I'll give you 20 quid for it. And I went, yeah, I know, I'm just having a joke, mate. You know what I mean? I really hope somebody might buy it, but But over the years, it's got worse and worse, and it's really harsh. And the guys at Leaf, when I sent in all the tracks that I'd done, they said, "No, we can't. This doesn't really fit on the record. It's kind of too." It didn't like the piercing sound of the stylophone. It was just too. It was too much against the lush string kind of pad on that track. But the studio cover was. I wanted that to be a really proper kind of authentic 80s sounding cover, and it just the sounds that happened to come out in that particular time were so wonky. I just found a MIDI file of it on the internet, and I just fired each part through the Moog and adjusted the thing, and then I just ended up with this incredibly wonky sound.
It's great. We'll play that in a sec.
Cool.
I can. What's very, very interesting with this thing is it actually looks like it's got plastic keys on it as opposed to,
That's
having,
it. Yeah.
And that really makes it quite unique. I've not seen one like that before.
No, and each key makes a very squeaky. It squeaks when you press it down. It's very weird. It just doesn't play. You play a scale, and you end up halfway into the next octave by the time you finish playing the octave.
I had when I first got the Neutron, the calibration on that was just a little bit out. So as you went further up the scale, it started creeping further and further and further up.
Yeah.
And at first, I thought I actually quite like this. There is a thing in music that the ear wants to hear slightly higher notes. Blues players will bend the strings slightly sharp. There's big tradition of that, and jazz singers will often sing slightly sharp. I must admit, though, in the end, I took it apart and tweaked it. But these things can be really interesting. I'm sure Leo will be interested in seeing that if you could see it in the flesh. But it's quite a unique thing. So Sussudio then. That was the track when I first heard it. I remember the original when it came out in the 80s. And the first thing that actually knocked me over with that track is the drum programming in it was the first time I'd heard a drum machine being used solely as a creative device, where it wasn't trying to be a drummer, it wasn't trying to replicate a human being, it was doing something for its own ends. And so there was this completely unplayable but intriguing rhythm, of which then Lee Sklar then played that marvellous bass over the top.
I love it. The groove is incredible. It's such an incredible groove. Right? It is. You can. I mean, I've got No Jacket Required. I got a new record player fairly recently, and the record player I got, it was as if it's made for that record player. It's as if it's made for the system that I've got now, and the whole album is great. I have no problem admitting that.
No.
I am a fan of Phil Collins, whereas I think still for a lot of people it's like in jazz, it's very unfashionable to not like Dave Brubeck, for example. But there's, Brubeck's music was so broad and it contains so much innovation and interest that it's really easy to gloss over it and go straight to Take Five and the radio hits and whatever. So it's the same thing with Phil Collins. I think there's a lot of very interesting musical stuff going on.
Well, let's face it, I mean, he also plays other projects. If you look at Brand X, which did some really, really interesting jazz rock stuff back prior to his solo hits. And his own solo albums, as you say, there's some intriguing stuff on them. And it always has been right up until quite recent ones. I think that the problem was at the time, the music media in those days was all powerful. And there's very much a sense of style fascism going on of saying, you must like this, you must not like this. And I think at the time that got too ingrained into people that there became this thing in the end that Peter Gabriel was the cool one and Phil Collins was the jazz. Yeah. And it really wasn't like that at all. Both of them did very interesting albums. At least with Phil Collins, when he does do his Motown stuff, he does it with a passion, and he does it well. If you think of the Motown covers that he's always done them extremely well and with his own style. I have to say, when I heard Peter Gabriel doing that album that he did in 1993, which had the track Steam on it, to me, there's Tony Levin playing a great bass line in there, but his vocals in it sound like Dad at the wedding karaoke. It sounds awful at times.
I must check that out. I didn't know it.
The video will make you cringe. Honestly, you'll be hiding behind the sofa like this.
Right.
You will honestly cringe, and his live performance of it could be even more cringe-inducing.
Okay.
So, this whole business of one cool and one being very cheesy, it's not true. It really isn't. Both need to be taken seriously, in my opinion. They're both extremely talented men.
No, I agree. So, of course, Gabriel's I think the first time I got really into him was his first solo album, and the first track has that incredible synth work on it, Moribund the Burgermeister, and I loved it because it was so zany and off the wall and very prog. But I don't know, there's something really quite beautiful about this, if that's the right word. I don't know how to describe it, but I thought, wow, is this really Peter Gabriel? And then the second track is Salisbury Hill. And then it's a real magpie sequencing of musical styles, I think, on that record. And humdrum is very beautiful, and, texturally, it's a very rich record, But, yeah.
How did you get on with on the subject of Peter Gabriel? How did you get on with the following albums? My pick, I like number 3 and obviously number 4, but I kind of, over the years, I've heard much more to number 3, which obviously had the track Biko on it, but also had some really challenging, musically challenging stuff on it for the time. How did you feel about those albums?
I mean, I haven't listened to those for a while, but I did have a period where I started with his first solo record and listened to all those. Yeah. And then I bought So, and I thought So was fantastic. There was only one track I really didn't like on So, but I felt all of them were really amazing, pretty much. And but no, of those first 4 solo records he did, I think I really liked 1. 2 was really interesting. His Games Without Frontiers is on the second one, isn't it? Or is that the third one?
That's the third one.
Right. Because I think, I think my interest kind of started to take. By the time it was at number 4, there wasn't really anything on 2 I can recall. 3 was interesting. Yeah. But I think 1 and bits of 3 definitely, from what I can remember. I must explore those again though.
The thing I remember of number 3 is, of course, Intruder, with the famous gated drum pad that Phil Collins had done, and they'd stuck it through the gate in the talkback in the desk, which made that very big boom, 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 boom.
Okay, well.
And you got this sort of breathy description of creeping around somebody's house, breaking into their house, rummaging through their stuff, and you've got Kate Bush screaming in the background, and somebody that's, the help, there's an intruder in the house. And it really makes for quite an intense piece. Very, very challenging at the time. And it follows up with tracks like No Self-Control and tracks like that, really, really interesting and really quite challenging stuff.
Yeah, no, it's good. These techniques of, studio trickery to, get beyond just clean sound from the mic into the desk, and then you do some post-production. But actually, I don't know. Yeah, I think things like that where you use like really lo-fi bits of technology to just throw a bit of spice in there is kind of what it's all about. I mean, I guess that's why I'm was drawn to the stylophone so much. I thought that there has to be something that can be done with this broken thing and this really amazing, fully functioning thing. Because since Rudy did the modification on the Memory Moog, it hasn't ever missed a beat. It's been 100%. And he always says, look, it's 40 years old. Don't think it's invincible, all right? It's an old gal. So, and I think when I was touring it, because originally when I'd recorded the music, and then I was really keen to work with an artist, video artist in Manchester called Michael England, and we developed the music with visuals and film that he made, and we would perform that together. So it was a live audiovisual experience. And one of the reasons why was because, well, firstly, because I love his work. It's just incredible. The amount of time and effort that he puts into his work is astonishing. And so I was really, really lucky to work with him. And yeah, I think one of my things was the reason why I wanted to do it with visuals, and not only because I wanted to work with him, but I also thought that playing the synthesizer by itself is a particularly dull thing to watch somebody do in of itself. And then there was a gig where doing the visual stuff wasn't possible, and I did a couple of the tunes just on my own. It was part of a film festival gig in Leeds, and it was one of the first questions I asked. Some friends of mine came. I said, was that truly dull watching me just stick a finger down and like twist a knob for 10 minutes? Like, did that? I mean, do you know what I mean? That's pretty dull. And the stuff where it was more active, and I kind of quite a physical performer, so I was concerned that going forward, if I was just doing it by myself, like I would do a solo piano gig, would a solo Moog gig work? And actually, people did still feel engaged, even though it was just doing that. And so for me, it just feels like really undynamic. But I kind of really got into it. So that was another interesting thing about taking this huge machine on the road. And when I was speaking to Rudy about taking it abroad, I won't fly with it. So I thought, well, couldn't I borrow somebody else's Lintronics Advanced Memory Moog abroad, if I went to Germany or if I went to the States? And he said, forget it. He said, you're a crazy guy. No one takes this thing out of their studio. And I think you're taking it onto a stage with lights and it's unpredictable. He said, you're a madman. And this is when he said, don't forget, she's 40 years old, man.
Yeah.
And I just said to him, well, it's a testament to the quality of your work that I have. I mean, I'd be very careful when I moved it around, of course, but it is it's like an old friend. When I put the phones on, and I just get lost in this universe that it is, and it feels very much an extension of me. And I've done some new tracks with Keeley Forsyth, and I keep going back into the same kinds of sounds or these familiar corners of the synthesizer, because it seems to resonate so well with me with certain sounds. And when I had the Mini Moog restored by him, I gaffer taped a copy of Moog Memory to the bottom of the Mini Moog, and I didn't say anything. And about 10 days later, he emailed me, says, I got your gift. And he said, I'm going to listen to it later. And then a couple of days later, I said, did you have a chance to listen? And he said, yeah. He said, it's not the music I like so much, but the sounds that you created are really interesting or are really unusual. And then he said, are you sure that you only used the Lintronics Advanced Memory Moog to do this record? And to me, that was the biggest compliment, because I just think he's the first person that should tell me how exactly I did it. And he was like, are you sure you just used this? And it's like, yes. And to me, I'm quite an intuitive user of any kind of synthesizer. I'm not particularly scientifically minded. It's probably why I didn't go digital and go with the DX7 route as well. Like we discussed, it's just a lot of tiny screens and a lot of menu diving. And I work with a guy called Frank Vigru who uses 2 octatracks, and he's like a virtuoso at diving into these menus, but he performs everything live now. He doesn't sequence anything in the computer. He just performs it. So he's the same. Anything that he can't perform live, doesn't get recorded.
Yeah.
And so again, this coming back to limitation, and what you were mentioning before we started was the knobs having the control right there on the body of the thing is a massive. It's just the appeal of that is huge versus something that's on a screen and you control it almost via magic from a distance. It almost seems like the false universe or something. But
yeah, and also the knobs on the machine to me make it an instrument in the same way that the stops on an organ make it the instrument. You can change it there and then on the fly, and that really defines the difference between an instrument and, let's say, a studio tool, which you could all control from your computer. And instruments, I think, need to have that. And I'm glad to see that if you look at most new UI designs, nearly all the synths coming out now all have knobs on, all have knobs and buttons. They've all tried to move away from menu diving. If, like me, you need glasses, menu diving live is no fun, particularly if your glasses fall off, which they have done in my case in the past. God knows what you get. Likewise, it's the knobs that really make it the instrument. It means you're really playing it then, in my opinion, anyway.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
Gonna play you track Sussudio. Guys on the chat room, if you want to ask Matthew a question, at me and I'll ask. So this is Sussudio, and this version of this is just great. Chat room, people have said, yeah. Chrissy says she remembers Gav had a Polymoog in his repair shop, which was at the time was in production room in Leeds, and he'd had it in his repair shop for weeks before he could really get it going. And Polymoogs likewise were quite temperamental, apparently.
Yeah, I had a Polymoog keyboard once, and that worked for a bit. And there was one patch on it that was really amazing. I think it was number 2. I can't remember what it was called, but it was like the Gary Newman patch. Like Gary Newman had used it.
Vox Humana, I believe that's called.
That was the one, yeah. And then it just stopped working, and I sold it for 90 quid. I mean, I remember I opened it up and thought, yeah, it was just spaghetti. It was amazing, incredible. So, yeah, another huge, massive... I mean, good attempts. They were really going for it, weren't they, really? And I often wondered why, until recently, I thought, well, why haven't Moog made a polyphonic synth? And then, of course, they recently brought out the Moog 1, which looks immense. I mean, I won't be buying it because I've got memory Moog, but my friend Frank Vigru, he recently brought a Ballaran synth called The River.
Mm-hmm.
And that thing is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I would really love one of those. They're made by this French company called Ballaran. Have you come across that?
I haven't. No.
Man, I've never.
I'll have to Google this now. I'll be intrigued.
The demo of it that I saw a while ago was astonishingly powerful. I'm like, wow. I really want one. So Frank has recently bought one from someone who's selling theirs. He got it at a very good price. I'm really jealous because he said to me, look, just sell your memory Moog, buy 2 of those, keep one in the studio and take one on the road. I'm like, yeah. They were $6,000 when they were released. It was a Kickstarter thing originally, I think. And then they made a prototype. And then they put some into production. But that is an amazing synth. That's probably the only other synth I'd really like to own. I used to think I would get a whole collection of them, and I wanted a VCS3 and a Synthy and an ARP 2600 or 500. Do you know what I mean? And I thought, no, actually, I'm okay with just these 2 Moogs, but I'd love a River.
I could tell you a story in a VCS3. Chrissy tried one at Leeds University, which was engaged in a documentary project. And she went off and she came back and I spoke to her sister. What was it like? She said, it was fucking useless. She said, basically, they ran the thing down, so all the pots were all crackly. Obviously, some capacitors are dried out, as they do. And it was in a fairly sort of bad state. And she said it basically sort of hissed and spattered her for about half an hour. And she said, if you moved any of the pots, it made horrible crinkling noise. And she said that there was the famous thing with the VCS3s, of course, was the pins. Because they had resistors in the end, but they couldn't get resistors that were really good. So the tolerances were really wide, which meant if you didn't put the exact pins in those slots in your patch that you had before, you could get wildly different results because the resistance all varied across all the pins, so you could get all sorts of unpredictable effects.
Yeah, I remember the College of Music had a Synthy, but it didn't have the suitcase keyboard. It just had a normal wooden controller keyboard, and again, it was a module I took in the second year, which Graham Hearn, who sold me the MS-10 we spoke about earlier. So it was my first experience of a synthesizer at all, and it was on that. And the fact that you had to tune the oscillator and patch things through, and there were a couple of Revox tape machines in the room. It was very old school, but I discovered I had a really natural ability to splice tape. Like I could make seamless splices. And Graham said, "Have you done this before?" I went, "No." I just had it was magical doing that stuff. There's a magic about that way of working, that hands-on, that physical. If you want a loop, you've got to make it, and you've got to be. And if you do a bad splice, you have to either make it sound deliberate, or you have to do it again, or I don't know. very fiddly, but it was like almost like model making in a way.
Yeah.
And then I guess tape, manipulating tape, and I bought my first Space Echo over 20 years ago, and I had I just had like a rehearsal digital keyboard that got stolen, and I went to a shop in Leeds who had 5 Space Echoes, and they were far too much money for them. And I went to the
Oh,
counter and
God.
I tried to bargain them down, and they nearly went for it. And there's a chap at the counter, and he said, are you looking for a Space Echo?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I've got one. I'm selling it with a load of gear. Do you want to come and have a look?" And I said, "Well, if you'll write me a fake invoice for this keyboard, if you say that I bought a digital keyboard off you,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll come and have a look." So I bought it for 300 quid, and I bought a rat distortion pedal off him as well. And you know what? Those 2 pieces of equipment I still use today. I mean, I mainly use it with the Fender Rhodes.
Yeah.
I don't use it. Sometimes I don't always have the Echo on because that would just be too much. But I put things through the Echo, and it's like an old friend, that thing. I mean, the Moog is definitely the most valuable and treasured instrument, electronic thing I have. But if anything happened to that little Space Echo, I would be distraught beyond measure. It would be like losing a member of my family, you know.
There was a story where Chrissy was touring with one of her bands, and they did a gig with a band called Boris, and Boris had 6 of them, and
Wow.
the roadie told her that they had 3 in use and 3 basically in the repair shop. And as they came out of the repair shop, they got on stage, and the ones that had been to it went back in the repair shop. And but as I say, Boris did this great sort of sludge rock sound. So there's lots and lots of delay and echo, as you can imagine, going through everything. And but he said they're constantly repairing the tapes, the drives, and everything. That they are very, very, very unique things, and there's not many around. Which actually, I'm amazed, judging how analog synths have come back into fashion, and people obviously love the original tape Space Echoes. I'm amazed Roland actually haven't started making them again, because there's obviously a market for the real thing as well as the digital things.
Yeah, I mean, I've used a pedal. I've used an Echo pedal, the Boss one that they make, or I can't remember, and it's good, but it's not the same, unfortunately. It's great. It's great. It's very convenient. But I mean, I toured 2 weeks ago. I went to Romania, and I took it with me to Romania in my hand baggage to the gig, because I said that the festival, the Garana Jazz Festival, is, you know, really, they had a great backline, and I asked before, I said, could they get me a Space Echo? And they said, "I know, you know, they're just having trouble getting, you know, that's not on the cards." I went, "Right, I'll just bring mine then." So I just carry this thing. Security love it because it looks like a bomb with a timing device in the 1950s. And they're looking at it going, you know, I lift the lid on it, and they're like, "What? Yeah, it looks okay." You know, I know it's not supposed to joke about those things, but it's true, and I don't know, spices up their day, doesn't it?
I can remember coming back with our band, and we did a gig in Malta. And this is the days before Brexit, when you had the blue channel that you could go through, but of course Malta's outside the EU, and we had.
So you had carnets for all the equipment, right? Did you have to do that?
Yeah, actually, to be fair, when we did Malta, you had to have a carnet to actually detail all of your stuff, which was quite specific. You had to detail what it was, what size it was, what the serial number was. For Malta, this was actually quite a cheap, this wasn't an expensive thing. As long as you had that bit of paper stamped going out, there was stamp it coming back in, and it actually wasn't a big deal. Other countries may well be totally different, because world trade rules are that these countries can impose their own tariffs, their own duties, and their own specifics on. Going to somewhere like Brazil, for example, could be a complete nightmare. However, we came back into Stansted, and it was something ridiculous. It was at 1:30 or something like that in the morning, and we pulled all this stuff around to customs, and a guy at the desk was clearly getting to the end of his at the end of his shift, and he sort of looked at us, and the look on his face was like, "Fuck off." I was like, "Okay, mate, here's a card, it's all our passports," and he was like, "Stamp," and you're like, "Go on, off you go." So, don't you want to see what's inside? No, like, off you go. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, great.
But yeah, that was one of the rare things. But how this will be this time in January or whatever, God alone only knows. To look at it positively, I think so many people in Europe like British bands touring over there, particularly in the Nordic countries. I would say, looking optimistically, some sort of agreement will be forged between the various countries, specifically for musicians, or if not in a formal, maybe some sort of informal agreement. But yeah, it's a disaster situation we're in, and we'll have to see what happens. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I think we just have to plod on and not try and make a big deal out of it, and just take it in his stride. And I think, hopefully it'll be okay.
Yeah, that's all we can do. I've got your piece here, Keithley, which is your vid. Because of OBS, it wouldn't allow me to fast forward through to the actual piece. And it's such an interesting vid, and it's not that long. I'd actually like everybody to see the whole length, because the intro is great. How you build up the mood memory intro, and you build up that graphic, and you have that sequence of notes coming in.
Yeah.
I think it would seriously be cool for everybody to see it.
Yeah, they should. I mean, that is all Michael England's work. I mean, we kind of camped out here in my front room.
Yeah.
And Michael set up these like CCTV cameras, one on the ceiling, one on the side. I mean, this is how we work live as well. And he also has a vector scope. So the green image, the green kind of effects image is a vector scope. So what he was doing actual 3D vector rescanning on all the axes. So it's not just a plug-in on a computer doing this thing. He's actually doing it for real.
Good God.
You know, doing all this. Yeah. So what you're seeing is actually an artist at work doing the real thing, and there's possibly him and only one or two other people that go to those lengths to do the real thing and to do it right.
Yeah.
You know. So his setup time on stage, we were setting up. I think I got quite quick with mine, but his equipment, because he was using a lot of, he was using bits of digital, the spectroscope, and a lot of it was really fragile as well. So there could be a lot of temperamentality with it, as much as my analog thing, because the Minimoog that I had at the time wasn't modified. So that would do kind of weird things too. So it was really good to kind of be on stage with someone else who kind of had to take care, and he really gave a shit about doing it properly and doing the right thing. So that video, that piece actually, as he was experimenting with the cameras and getting things right and trying things out, I was kind of just musing on this, you know, these sounds and the music, and then he said, right, you know, let's go for one. I thought, well, yeah, let's just record this. And that's what happened in the video. So the video is like a live, I'm just playing it straight through, and that's the first time I played that piece, if you like. So, and that's the one that's on the EP. So anyway, go ahead.
Okay, guys, here we go. I'm going to play this, and that gives me a chance to go and get a drink as well.
Must be what it was like being a live TV producer. I think. Why isn't he going? What's going on?
I know, I'm not a video person. Chrissy's really into video, and it's one of these things that's always that bit beyond me. I'm good with stills, but that's about it. Painting, drawing, all of that I can do, but video is one of these things I can never master. So it's like, well, I'm doing this. I hope that's working. I think it's working. It looks like it's working. Unfortunately, I haven't got any decent beers. I've only got this stuff I could get from Aldi, which is, it's okay, but...
What is it? They're those little stubby bottles of French-style beers.
Yeah!
I quite like those.
Yeah, it's quite nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1079. There's one called 1079, and there's another one that's similar, and this is a stuff called...
There's one that's like 4%.
I think it's, 4.5%. But it's actually not bad.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's ended. Back to me and you. Great. So looking at the chat room, Chrissy says, "Wow, that was amazing." Leah Calder says, "That's a very strange stylophone." Yep. So you might want to add that to a collection at some point if you can find one like that.
Yeah, it's weird. I've never seen another one.
Yeah, I hadn't. When I looked at that, is that a stylophone? Good God.
I mean, it is, but it's just one with keys, and it's yeah. I mean, technically, then, is it not a stylophone because you're not using it with a stylus?
Well, I would sort of guess so, because I thought the whole point of the stylophone was the stylus. But then, if you think about the music easel, the Buchla music easel, which is also steel based, which that's another interesting thing. That gig you do with Caitlin Aurelia Smith, she was using one of those a lot during her set. She had that, and she had the Teenage Engineering OP1, which she was using as a looper.
Yeah.
And I think she had a few other things as well. But the music easel is a fascinating instrument, but you got to say like $5-6 grand.
Well, yeah, again, Franck Begrou had one of those, and I remember he and his wife used to use it for their different musical projects. But you know what? I have to say that when you used it, when you move the knobs, it doesn't really feel that substantial.
Really?
It feels like, it feels quite fragile, and maybe that's because of maybe that's just the feel of the knob, but it kind of things would like wobble around on it, and he sold it because he just thought it's too. I mean, it was in a box, it was in a really good case, and it was an amazing thing, but he really worried about it. You know, breaking, and it seemed fragile, even though it's an amazing thing. So I don't know whether that was. I'm sure the build of it was like, great, but there was a feel to the interface that was. It felt like you needed to be very delicate with it,
Yeah.
So not that you bash all the other stuff around, but if you're on the road and you're taking suitcases and going to airports, the Buchla music easel is not something that you would watch disappear down a conveyor belt, is it? Do you know what I mean?
No. I've heard so many sort of horror stories of, Price's cellos being smashed and violins being smashed, and it's absolute horror stories. And there was a whole spate of it on Twitter. I think last year there was a whole spate of some instruments being damaged in transit. It's quite horrifying. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, you can get the best case you want for a synth, which will protect it against it being bashed. But if you're standing up and you're holding it with somebody else, and one of you lets go and it falls on the floor, of a height of 3 foot, it's going to get damaged, whether it's in a pelly case or what. It doesn't matter. Like if it's heavy enough to need to be carried by 2 people, and it falls or it gets dropped, you it's risky business. So
Yeah, it's a PCB can break, and a PCB can break very subtly. So without test equipment, you can't even see where it's broken. But you just enough to put some resistance in a track somewhere.
yeah.
Stevie, your Mini Moog, superb. Your Mini Moog Model D. How did you acquire that?
Well, that was again. I did like a quite a piss takey throwaway track on the Memory Moog. It was very there's something a bit Vincent Price about it. It was very organ-like and horror-like, and had this kind of arpeggiated bass thing on it. And a friend of mine called Andy Wood, who's the brother of Bruce Wood, who runs a studio at Leeds called Touchwood Studio.
Yeah.
Andy commented, I think, on Facebook at the time and said, "Great, I love the solo. You should try my Mini Moog out sometime." So I texted him immediately and said, "What are you on about your Mini Moog?" He said, "Yeah, come round and have a look at it." And he gave me the Mini Moog and he said, "It doesn't work." No, he said, "Try it out," but it didn't power up. So I had Trevor Leroyd put a new, basically make good on the power supply so it worked. And then he just let me have it for a year. And he said, "Look, get used to it, get to know it, don't just jump in and give me a wad of money, see if you really want it first."
Yeah.
So I did. And then when I did the Radioland project with Frank Vigru and Anton Schmidt in 2015, I thought, I really need to buy this now because I'm going to use it. I'm going to take it on the road, and it doesn't feel right. Me just using someone else's thing. So I bought a case for it, and then I made him an offer, took the cash round. I don't think he was expecting. I handed him the cash straight away. We agreed on the price, and I just gave it to him straight away. And he said it was like something out of a gangster film.
Yeah,
come up with
Futurama. Shut up and take my money.
And then it was great. But then he said, "How much more have you got in your pocket? How much more could I have tapped you for?" And I said, "Not much," because I said, "I've got an extra 100 quid in my wallet.
Yeah.
I owe a friend of mine 70 quid from a gig that we did last week.
Yeah.
And I'm going to the cinema, and I'm going to go and get some food. So that's the 70 and the 30 quid taken care of. So
yeah,
I would have held on to that if you'd have wanted a bit more." And he's like, "That's totally fine by me."
Yeah.
So I kept it for a while, and I really loved the fact that the modulation circuit on it was a bit frazzled, and one of the oscillators didn't retune up, one of the knobs was broken. I really loved it. And then I just again had the opportunity to think, well, okay, it really does need a bit of looking at now. I'll just send it to Rudy and get him to do it. And of course it came back and it looks amazing, and it's a fantastic machine. It's really, really nice. However, I have to say that even though it's all fixed up and it's beautiful and it works really well, there is something I miss about the old, slightly not working properly Mini Moog. About the unpredictability is not the same, as it were. Let's say it's great. I love it, but there's something about equipment that is got its own rewired thing going on. It's like just like, right, I'm old and I'm going to work like this. And you're just going to have to do it. And I think I love machines. I work with a guy called Ben Lambdin, who's the producer, Nostalgia 77, and a couple of albums ago, I went in, and in the studio at Antonio's studio in London, they had a load of broken, weird old keyboards that just so. Ben also is really a lover of that old. They just tell some interesting stories that pristine instruments don't tell, or they just tell different. It's a different way of telling the same story, or something like that.
It's a funny thing that there's an analogy with guitars. So I'm also a guitarist, and the thing with guitars is when you buy them new, they really kind of ask you to impose your personality on them in one way or another. And everybody does. Everybody changes strings and mucks about. Sometimes they change the tuners, they change pickups, and they do all sorts of things. And some people actually don't do any of it. They just kind of impose themselves through the music. Jimi Hendrix springs to mind. When they looked at his Strat that he played on Woodstock with his very, very famous concerts, it was actually pretty much shop standard. He'd only really just turned the strings upside down to make it. But that was Jimi Hendrix. I mean, he's one of the all-time, if not the all-time great. But
I mean, going back to Frank Vigru, he's a guitarist. He actually is a guitarist who's just makes electronic music pretty much all the time. But a few years ago, he did a solo guitar record.
Right.
It's called Cement, Ciment, and he originally released it as just 300 vinyl, no download, no MP3.
Yeah.
Although it's on Spotify, you can listen to it. And I loved it. And I went round to his place a few years ago when I was, we were doing this other project, and he'd built a cupboard in this studio room, which had soundproofing in it. And I went, "What's this?" It had the amp in it. I said, "Oh, do you sit in there?" No, I said, "Is that where you put the amp and record it?" It's like, "No, I recorded it in there." In this, like, cupboard. So he said, I shut the door. Yeah. So he had, I think, a Fender Twin or something. He borrowed a Neumann U87. Yeah. Just a guitar. That's it. Yeah. And I said, "It's great. I love it. It's fantastic." And so what guitar did you use? And he said, "It's actually the guitar that my mother bought me when I first started playing when I was a teenager. Cost maybe €150. Yeah. And then he started to laugh and he said, "You know what? I didn't even tune the fucking guitar." You know what? The music's amazing. But Frank can make music out of like this pen. He can make. I remember his setup once was 2 Revox tape machines and 2 contact mics, and that's. He could make engaging music from anything, and so when he told me the story about the guitar, I just thought that is music to my ears. I just love that you can approach anything with the right sensibility, and you can make work from it.
People with that sort of talent, as you say, can make an entire album out of a pen. That height of musicality, of being able to use stuff like that, that's that's really the kind of the key skills really to acquire. I think. Speaking of the Mini Moog, one of the things I found, particularly when I got my Model D, is if anybody's sussed the UI, the perfect user interface for a synth, it has to be Moog, because you can go right across this and it makes perfect sense. It's really flexible. You can see exactly how the signal path works. And there was a friend of Brian Eno said in his interview some time ago, that he said the thing that he was always pushing for in UI design is being able to make the maximum out of the smallest number of controls. And he used to cite the Fender Stratocaster as being the perfect example, that you've got 3 knobs and a 5-way selector switch, but you can make tremendous, huge differences just between those 5 knobs. And I think with the Model D, it's the right number of knobs and switches, and everything counts on it.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think I've said I didn't not that I struggled with it, but I've been so used to the memory Moog. Yeah. And the thing that people say about the memory Moog is it's 3 mini Moogs in one machine. It's like, no, it is not. It's not 3 mini Moogs in one machine at all. So with the mini Moog, I was thinking, right, so how do I work this? How do I become excited by this thing now? There wasn't, almost like there was no mystery in it anymore. Because with the memory Moog, it's vast, this ocean of buttons, and you're like, how do you, like looking at one of Rudy's patches, you just think, how do you get there? How did you do that? And then when you find the one section and you start twiddling with one of the knobs and you change the value from one point to the next. You just think, oh, it's that, and it's just in some weird little corner of the programming that makes all the difference. I mean, there were some sounds on Moog Memory where I would find them and I think, well, I'm never going to save this, so I need to record it now. And then when I hit A and I advance the program forward, it's gone forever. So I can never go back to it. So that's the other thing I quite like about the Memory Moog is that if you want to write a patch, you have to kind of overwrite you have to overwrite something. Yeah. But you can use the sysx librarian to dump all of the sounds into a sysx, file on your computer. Yeah. So occasionally I save whatever I've got by date order. So if I want to go back and experience the Moog exactly as it was when I recorded that record or when we did Radioland, I can just load those settings back into the machine. And again, it's a very clunky way of doing things, but it's just saved as a file rather than onto a tape machine. Yeah. So that's fine. I mean.
Yeah.
So,
that's great. I got the same thing with the machines I've got. Certainly with the Matrix Brute. There's actually a tour who've done this great little software patch whereby you can move everything back in, and it will give you the buttons on the Matrix as to what's been pushed and one thing and another. It's really useful.
I'd love to have a go on one of those.
You've got to, come by all means, when you're next in London, let me know. Come round my studio. You can have some fun in here. There's great stuff come out now. As we were saying earlier, I think the modern thing is they now realise synths need knobs on them, and they really do. It gives you that control, and it allows you to be spontaneous.
Yeah, and to make accidents as well, I think, to slip up and press the wrong thing or move something a bit too far or not enough.
Yeah.
And you end up just going down another rabbit hole. And but it's the tactile nature of it. I think that there's a book I read called Analog Days.
Yeah, Trevor Pinch.
Which Trevor is a really good book. And the title is a bit misleading because the title doesn't really. I mean, the book. What am I trying to say? The book talks about Moog and Buchla equally, and the differences in their approaches to electronics and what the thing is for. That book is fascinating. I mean, the title itself doesn't really. It doesn't really give the impression that you're going to get that story, but it's. I think it was a really. The only thing I had about the problem with the book I had was that. One of the most amazing synth pioneers, which was Annette Peacock and Paul Bley, they're not even in the discography.
That's weird.
And I thought, at least, you don't have to talk about them in the book because it's. But I mean, the famous story about how she got that Moog from Bob Moog was that they drove to Traumensburg in this huge car, and Annette was saying, right. You talk to him, you give him the rap, and I'll just stand there. Yeah, I'll just stand there, and because it was me who was going to use it in their synthesizer show, and in the end they walked out of there with a huge Emerson style modular for nothing. They didn't pay a penny for it because at the time Moog was like, well, of what use is this anyway? I'm sure musicians won't be interested in it. And then they came along and said, well. We've got these shows, we've got this solo album coming up in RCA, David Bowie hooked me up with it. So he just went, yeah, great, there you go. So supposedly they were gifted this Moog by Bob Moog. And I asked Annette, like some years ago, I said, what happened to the Moog? And the details of the story I can't remember, but the upshot of it was that they had to leave it. There wasn't time to go. They had to leave it behind on the street in the middle of New York.
Oh my God!
They put it out on the street and they had to leave it there.
Oh my God!
And that's it.
Oh my God!
So if that still exists or who's got it, I don't know. That's quite. it was quite a story, but that was the conclusion of it, I think. But yeah. So, but easy come,
easy come, easy go. That's what. How you? I'm getting really interested into West Coast synth approaches because it's not taken off really until recently. Anything like East Coast had done, and I think for a variety of reasons. The stories I've heard is that Don Buchler was particularly difficult to work with, and he had very, very strange ideas about his business and how it was going to be run. And he had this rather strange idea that whereas with Moog they've equipped musicians with instruments that are very manipulative, very able to manipulate and be able to get very, very interesting sounds of. There was a big thing with Don Buchler is that he wanted to present musicians with challenges that the machines would be semi-intelligent and would very often make interesting decisions, as they were, of their own. Certainly his ideas on oscillators, whereby you have waveforming, you have complex oscillators and waveforming. There's a certain amount of that in the matrix sprues, which is really, really interesting, really, really useful. But because his stuff was so expensive, ridiculously expensive, that musicians haven't really had access to actually even play with it until recently. Pittsburgh Modular have taken a lot of the ideas up, and Make Noise have taken a lot of the ideas up. And I'm really interested to engage with it and find out really what it's all about and what it offers. I'm fascinated by West Coast.
Yeah, and I liked in that book it described the two very different approaches to that both Moog and Buchler had, and I think if I remember rightly, Moog was very interested in how the technology could be utilized by musicians. How can we make this? How can we, make this a thing?
Yeah.
And I think Buchler was the other way. Buchler was, actually, this sound isn't. I think he was the other way in terms of the controller, the interface that Moog chose was the 12-note keyboard, or the key. And Buchler, if I remember, was more like, the way the sound is produced has nothing to do with Western classical music, and therefore you should be allowed to sculpt using touch plates or different surfaces to make those things. And I love that. I'm
really, really fascinated by it.
Yeah, it's amazing. But going back to that early experience I had with the synthy, it was very much right. This has nothing to do with the keyboard. I have to decide what the parameters are and then patch it in, and then I have to decide whether I control it with a joystick or whatever. And I think that was such an open. It's like a complete. It's an open book. You think, that can, I don't know. So I think with the Buchler thing, that definitely tapped in to the spirit of that more than. I think, I've got a sound and now I'm going to play a scale with it. It just seems bizarre if you think of it in those terms.
That's why I'm particularly interested in Buchler and West Coast, because from the surface of it, it looks like it offers a whole new way of thinking, and that's what interests me. I want to find out what that could actually offer me musically. The Buchler modulars are unbelievably expensive. A small one, an entry-level one, is about 10 grand. And they go all the way up to 300 grand. The biggie that's in EMS Stockholm that they've got is something like 300 grand, something like that. And that's pretty much the one thing that, if anybody ever wants to go to EMS and work there and study there, that's the thing they all go for, because that's really unique. There's nothing else like it. And it's not something that you can kind of put together quickly in a Eurorack system either. Now, as I say, Pittsburgh Modular are actually picking up on a lot of these ideas, and I'm really interested to see where they go with it. And
I did a concert with Suzanne Sayani and Peter Zinoviev, and they played. We did a set each, and Peter played with the cellist called Lucy Railton on the gig, and Sayani. I really like Suzanne Sayani's work. Actually, it's really easy to get into, and there's a playfulness about it, but she used obviously almost exclusively Buchla stuff. So when she was setting up and getting things sorted, she got a little Buchla unit. It was really fascinating, and we were talking about this thing, and she also had an iPad with an Animoog. Right. The thing is that the Animoog is in spirit with the keyboard on the Animoog. I think the Animoog is an amazing synth because it allows you to do this thing with your fingers on the pad.
Yeah.
And that synth was built for the iPad. It wasn't a Minimoog built to emulate. It wasn't emulated and made for the iPad.
No, it's using the iPad.
And you know what? It's really versatile and it's pretty powerful for what it is. Yeah. And I saw it and I said, "Hey, you've got an Animoog. What do you do?" She said, "I love it. It's a really neat little thing, and it's so instant, and it does bear a lot of similarities to the Buchla thing, particularly just with the aspect of the touch thing." And so that was really interesting. I was amazed she had this really very hip, very powerful Buchla stuff, and yet there was an iPad with the Animoog, which she probably got for free, like I did when it came out. But I was like, respect. I like it. Like, you've got like the real thing, and then you've got this other digital thing that was real. And it's kind of like the Animoog to me is like a very honest thing. It's not trying to be something else in a box, in an interface.
No, it's very its own self.
Yeah, I don't really use it very much, but when I get it out and have a play with it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. And I could do solos on that screen and the keyboard. I could do little things that I just can't do on a keyboard. You can't feel your way around it as much as you can with just a flat surface or something. Or you can't. So, I mean, I've also got a Rolly, a Seaboard.
Chrissy's got one of these, and I was on about getting one, and she was like, ooh. But she's also a violinist, so for her it's quite intuitive to play. And several times I've had a go at it, and I think it's one of these things that you have to get it, and you just have to practice and work with it and really get into it. And you have to put aside any of the prejudices you've got about keyboards, because I know they're laid out like a keyboard. They're really not. You can slide the notes up and down and do all sorts of things.
Yeah, I went to see them in London, and I had to go on one, and the guy, he took me through the thing, and I sort of said to them, well, I'm really interested in it, because there's anyone done an album only using the Rolly? It's kind of just off the back of the Moog Memory thing. I thought, well, I love the idea of it. So they basically did me a really nice deal on this. I can't remember how big, not the full size one, but the mid-size one, and it was funny because I haven't really delved into it that much since I got it, purely for the reason that it was that same month, I think, that Keith Tippett said to me, "Do you want to do some playing together?" And then, all of a sudden, I found myself focusing on the piano again. After doing a lot of electronic things for a few years, I thought, wow, well, if I'm going to play with Keith Tippett, I really need to get my shit together, both pianistically, musically. So the Rolly kind of was like this thing that emerged. I'm like, wow, great, I've got this thing. I'm like, oh, but I've got to get serious about my piano now. So it's kind of just sitting there at the moment, but maybe that's the next thing. Apart from building a studio and buying a JCB and doing
now on the subject of JCB, this is the most amazing thing I've seen, and I've got a picture of it here. I heard you saying about it, but wow, there's some serious work going on in this.
Yeah.
And you got the other pictures, which I didn't get time to actually. Unfortunately, I didn't actually get time to actually prep. But wow, building. There's one version I saw of your studio, which is that as it is at the moment now, or it is.
Well, what's going on at the moment is that the access to my house was quite narrow. So there was a large retaining wall and a field above it.
Yeah.
And below that wall was another wall and a piece of earth that ran all the way along.
Yeah.
There were 15 Leylandii trees, a bank,
Yeah.
loads of earth, 2 sheds, an oil tank. So the thing is that the studio I'm going to build is kind of around the corner and down, almost underneath the house here.
Right.
So the issue is that site vehicles, large trucks with trailers,
Yeah.
equipment needs come in. It's never going to get around there. So I thought, well, I've got to remove the gate post, the wall, all of the earth, the retaining wall, and all the earth underneath the retaining wall to rebuild it again.
Yeah.
Entire length. So the wall is 2.5 meters high by 40 meters long.
Jesus. That's serious heavy engineering doing this.
It's immense. And I have, and the guys I've got to come and build the wall, I've been kind of helping them move the stone and move things into position and everything. But the work leading up to them actually laying the first stone in the wall, I just did it all myself. So I haven't had a team of people. So I don't mind in saying that actually it's been really grueling and really hard.
Yeah.
I don't recommend it for anyone. I don't recommend buying a piece of plant machine. Well, I do actually know, because I actually love this thing now.
Yeah.
I'm never going to sell it. It cost me a lot of money.
Yeah.
I can't sell it. I know that I'm going to have problems when I finish with it.
I have to say, if you're at all into railways and preserved railways, Chrissy might find you and your JCB useful for work. She could get you work, I think.
I've put in about over 100 hours of stick time on that machine now. So I've got some groundworking skills. I don't mind saying that. I've done more on that than I have done music.
I must admit, one of my fantasies for ages is having a country-based studio in nice landscapes. It goes back from the times of seeing people like Mike Oldfield who built these lovely studios in the middle of nowhere on the sides of the hills and things. You think, wow, that's a great place to work. And Tristram Carey did the same thing. He had this house in Suffolk that's in the middle of nowhere. It's not even in the place that he describes as Fressingfield. It's actually really out in the middle of nowhere. And he converted this double garage into his studio and built most of the gear. So he had all sorts of envelope folders and stuff in it. He built out of recycled parts from Army and Navy surplus. Yeah. I'm going to do a documentary on him because it's his 100th birthday in 2025. He also helped design the Synthy and the VCS3. He's quite an understated bloke. For some reason, the classical crowd don't take him seriously. In all of the conferences I've been on electronic music, they've all gone around the same names time and time again. And they kind of, he was a major part of EMS and a major part of British electronic music back in the early 60s. It even started for recording with a 78-inch lathe cutter. So he would actually cut 78s off his lathe cutter, and that was his recording method. That was in 1951. And I kind of think the Brick Lane crowd would be out, wow. But he's a very, very interesting person. His music has, in my opinion, stood the test of time. A friend of mine, Tristan Burfield, did a small festival dedicated to him a couple of years ago now, out in Suffolk, because Tristan's based in Suffolk. And there were some great people there, but getting some of this on the radar with these guys is very, very hard. Still, never mind. That's going to be my project for
Wow,
in a
great.
few years' time.
Can't wait for that. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, so building studios in the country. I am also told of the story of Keith Emerson that he had his on a farm in somewhere, and was it the GX5, the really big white Yamaha? It was one of the first programmable poly analog synths. It was just before the famous CS80.
Mm.
And this was a big thing that looked much more like an organ. It's what he played Fanfare for the Common Man on.
Yeah.
Anyway, he had this in this studio that he built on this farm. And the reason he lost that synth was a drunken farmer with a tractor went in the side of his studio, was ploughing the end of the edge of his field and just carried on going and ended up trashing his synth.
Wow.
And that's the reason why that synth completely disappeared from his setup, because they'd only made something like 10 or 20 of them. He had one, the guy from ABBA had one, John Paul Jones and Led Zeppelin had one. And outside of trade people, that was it.
Yeah.
So he couldn't get a replacement.
Wow.
Fabulous machine. Do look it up. It's huge. And it was really built like almost like a Wurlitzer organ with
I've seen
three
a picture
manuals.
actually with one of the pictures of him in stadium or something, and it's this big white thing. I'm like, hell is that? That's what that is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what that is. And unfortunately, a farmer drove straight into it.
Wow.
Just goes to show. Make sure you haven't got any farmers with tractors near your studio.
Yeah. Well, the most damage I'd done with it is I went through an electric meter box. That was it. Oh no! I went through I dug up a gas supply cable.
I saw the picture of that. Yeah.
So I burst the cable.
Oh God.
Yeah, that was quite interesting. And then I was with my dad actually. My dad's went gas, and there was just this pipe coming out of the ground.
Yeah.
And it was actually, to be fair, it was very shallow. I mean, the driveway's here and the pipe.
Yeah.
I was literally just kind of tidying up a corner, and it just came out of, just literally pinged up.
Yeah.
It was just this gas just going. So I ran into the house. I thought, gaffer tape. So I went into the studio. I went to my room, got some gaffer. I thought, I'm glad I'm a musician, because everyone's got some gaffer tape, right?
Yeah. It's
So,
currently holding up the side of one of the undersides of the bumper on my car at the moment. It's great stuff.
So it's lucky that I thought, the gaffer, that'll seal it up. I'm fine. And just there are some problems. I nearly went through a mains electric as well, but I never avoided that.
Oh God, yeah, it's one of these things. When you build a studio, are you going to build it digital or analog or both?
Well, at the moment, I mean, budget-wise, I'm just concentrating on building the room.
Right, fair enough.
To work in. So the room will obviously house the piano. It's been designed by someone who helped refit Metropolis Studios when that was fixed. So he graduated and he was part of the team that refitted that. So, the room's got no reflectivity, no right angles, blah, 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 etc. So it'll have movable acoustic panels, so you could adjust the acoustic in the room as well. So in terms of equipment and desk and all the rest of it, I'm really not that far ahead with it. I think I'm still I'm just going to get the room built, inhabit the space, find out what works where, how it works, and then acquire more gear, which will be fun.
That's fine. There's nothing wrong with acquiring more gear.
I do have a Studer A80, which has just been serviced by Lewis Hopkins, so I'm really looking forward to using that to record with. To bounce tracks from. So I'm very lucky. I took that as payment for a project I did. He said, "How much do you want?" And I said, "Just give me the Studer A80." It's only had 190 hours use. Use. So I said, "Just give me that," and he went, "Yeah, okay then." He gave me it.
What? How many tracks is it? Stereo?
It's only 2. It's only.
Yeah.
But you could swap out the the head unit. If I wanted to make it, if I wanted to use, 4-track or whatever, I could always swap the headstock out.
I think, if I remember rightly, the A80's the desk-mounted one, so it's flat. It's not like a B77 or an
meter bridge. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a little meter bridge and a speaker in it. Yeah.
Yeah, we used to use them years ago for mastering. They were great for mastering on.
Yeah.
And the meter bridge, you used to be able to get some really nice compressors for it as well that were actually made by Stuart that you could plug in. And they were great because what you could do is you could overdrive the tape just a little bit and you get this nice saturated sound. So provided you had your mix behind that well and truly under control, you can get a really nice rich sound printing onto the tape.
Yeah, right, yeah. No, that sounds good. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having another tape device in my arsenal of things to muck around with. So
I must say, I'm limited by the fact my studio is probably 6 by 8 meters at best, which is
right.
The challenge is getting more stuff in, and I'm intrigued by that challenge. So there's going to be stuff on this wall going piling up here in the future.
Yeah.
Which I've got my eyes on, and more stuff behind me, and more stuff in front. The one thing about having a small studio that's about the size of a control room is, in the winter, it's warm and cosy.
Yeah, no, that is a good. You turn everything on, and then you're nice and warm. No fans. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really nice feeling.
Yeah.
I'd love to see when you've completed your studio. I think there's definitely calls for a Synth Mark II here, and you can show pictures of the studio.
Yeah, for sure.
But we've gone over time because it's 2036.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much, Matthew.
Thank you for having me. It's been really great.
It's been really great. It's been really, really good.
Yes.
And I think we would love, and I'm sure people would love to hear a part 2 later on when I can show more of the picks and explore more of the other stuff you do, because your output is so varied and there's so much of it. That's a great thing. There's so much good stuff to get into. So, guys, Google Matthew Bourne, not the choreographer, the musician. You can find him on Bandcamp. Do please explore and have a listen. There's much here, there's much on YouTube. There's some really great stuff there.
Thank you very much.
That's okay. Thank you very much. And, next week, folks, there's going to be a Synth Nutter special. What we're going to do is we're going to put the synths in the back garden and we're going to live stream a gig. Christy and I will be playing as CSMA, which is our band. So the Matrix group will be in the back garden. Some of the other stuff will be in the back garden. Chrissy's got a ferromini that she's going to explore using, and lots of other stuff. So tune in this time next week. And Matthew, thank you very much, and keep in contact.
Cheers.
Bye, there you go. And here we're going to play the Sting.